Growing up, I don't think we had a single moment free of struggle. We were a poor family that couldn't make ends meet most months, living basically day to day as we tried our best to stretch my father's income until the next paycheck came in. My father, God bless his soul, raised me by himself, and he was a hard-working man throughout his life. Mom passed, giving birth to me, her first and only child, and my father refused to remarry and to make things easier for him. I only ever loved one woman. He told me when we had talked about it once I had reached adulthood. That's not something you can replace. I'll take those feelings with me to the grave. Being the sole breadwinner in the house was a tall order to have to step up to. He was barely ever home, away for various jobs even during the weekends. In a sense, I sort of raised myself now that I think about it. But his absence never made me despise my father or grow distant towards him. Quite the opposite, in fact. It made the few precious moments we got to share mean even more to me. Some of those moments were during the holidays like Easter or Christmas when he didn't have to work. We lived out in the boonies in a small house that he had inherited when Grandpa had passed away. A cramped but comfortable place that was just the right size for the two of us. It was also close to the wilderness, so my father would go hunting for meat every once in a while. And don't question me on his methods of the legality of his actions. I can't answer either. Truth is, I never knew or cared. All that mattered was that he filled the fridge and kept me fed without having to spend a dime from our already limited budget. I grew up mostly on venison and wild rabbit. Pork and beef especially were a rarity. He tried to teach me from a young age to impart his knowledge onto me, but I wasn't an eager learner. I had no problem with eating cute forest critters, I just couldn't hunt them or take them down myself. But my father still tried, and taking me out on a few hunting trips with him and our old dog, Charles, my father's companion into the wilderness. He wasn't a pure breed, of course, just an old mutt that my father had rescued from a shelter. But he was big and had a keen sense of smell despite his age, so he was a huge help in tracking down prey. The few times that I saw him in action, I was impressed. One such instance comes right to my mind. The three of us, Charles, my father, and I, were out looking for a deer on a chilly autumn day. We had found tracks and followed them until we had spotted the deer, but my father had missed the shot and scared it away. Charles ran after the deer when it had bolted, and we ran after the dog to not lose him. He led us on a wild goose chase through the forest for a few minutes, but we finally caught up to him on the banks of a river that crisscrossed the trees. "What's he doing?" I asked my father, when we saw Charles pacing back and forth on the edge of the whirling waters. The deer probably jumped in and got swept by the currents," my father answered. The water had washed away the scent trail, so Charles is confused. We followed the river downstream, and true enough, we found the deer. Charles strutted over to it victoriously, giving us a good laugh. We had venison steak for dinner that night, and my father made sure to give Charles a big, juicy cut for his troubles. Anyways, my story takes place in that home when I was about 8 years old. Despite our shaky financial situation, my father always tried to make the holiday seasons special for me. Now, he could never afford fancy gifts like Game Boys, for example, when those were hot, but his gestures never went unappreciated. We mostly painted eggs together for Easter, or went out hiking before Christmas to find nice trees that we could take and bring home to decorate. But that particular Christmas hadn't gone down as planned. A few months beforehand, Dad fell ill and his condition had worsened until he was left bedridden. He didn't want to go see a doctor right away, saying that he only needed to rest up, but he eventually relented. After a round of tests, the doctors told him the one thing that nobody wanted to hear. He had pancreatic cancer, and it had already started spreading to other organs. All cancers are nasty, ugly affairs, but the pancreatic kind is especially vile. It gives nearly no symptoms until it is too late to do something about it, and that was the case for my father. Even with treatment, the doctors said that his chances for survival were slim at best. But my father refused any treatment, so they predicted his last breath to happen sometime around New Year's. The news had devastated him, though he shielded me from them to the best of his ability. I only found out about it later, when I was older. As it stood, I only knew that he was sick. Being a young kid that thought of his father as a permanent part of their life, the thought that he might leave me never even occurred to me. But he deteriorated visibly each day, until the neighbor had to come over every so often to help him out with the most basic of tasks. Why not someone from our family, you might ask? Simple. We had very few living relatives, and the ones that we did have were deadbeats, never giving a crap about us except when they needed to borrow money. They wouldn't have helped take care of a sick man, and they definitely wouldn't have taken me in after my father's passing. Listen, Nico. Dad told me one December evening after calling me into his bedroom, I'll be very sick for a while. I might never get better. His voice was weak and raspy, and I could tell that he had had difficulty getting those few words out. You will, I protested. Maybe, he relented. But until that happens, you'll need to go and live with someone else that can take care of you. I don't want to, I said, stomping my foot down. I know, he admitted, a few tears forming around his eyes. But you have to do it for me, okay? I didn't stay around to listen anymore. I ran out of the room, bawling my eyes out. Daisy yelled after me, trying to stop me, but I couldn't. I didn't want to live with someone else. I wanted to stay with my dad. After I got outside, I made my way to my usual spot where I played most days. A dingy little treehouse that Dad had built for me a couple of summers back, but I loved the place. I climbed up into it to hide, having no plans to actually run away from home. I simply wanted to be alone for a while, in a place where Daisy couldn't reach me to drag me back inside. I heard her calling for me for quite some time, but she eventually relented and went home for the night. But I spent the night wide awake up in the treehouse, looking over the forest as I tried to think of a way to solve our problems. I didn't have any money, and with Christmas right around the corner and me being a child, I couldn't earn it fast enough either. So any ideas involving doctors or payment in general were out at first. I wasn't very religious either, so prayer never even crossed my mind. Santa, I decided after every other solution went nowhere. He always brought me what I wanted. I'll ask him to make Dad better as my Christmas present. Not a bad plan, so long as you believed in Santa, of course, which at that young age I still did. In my mind, it was foolproof, a 100% guaranteed chance of success. I'd been a good boy all year. I helped out and never misbehaved, so Santa would have to give me the present that I wanted. After the plan was hatched, I went back inside and went to bed. No point in ruining my good boy streak. The next day, I woke up first thing in the morning, got my dad's handsaw, and ventured out into the woods all by my lonesome. With him being bedridden, we hadn't gone hunting for a Christmas tree that year, but we needed one for Santa, didn't we? That we did, and I decided to take the matter into my own hands. I spent all morning and a good chunk of the afternoon searching, until I found a fir that I considered good enough. Don't ask me the exact species, I have no idea. Back then, they were all just Christmas trees to me. Anyway, I got it down all by myself, which proved to be a much more difficult task than I had expected. I got tangled in the branches as I tried to reach its trunk. I received plenty of scratches and nearly poked out one of my eyes at some point, but I succeeded, and I dragged it back home victoriously. Where were you? Daisy scolded when I entered the house. She had returned while I was away, and she was ready to give me an earful for my outburst. "Your father was worried sick for you." I let her scold me to her heart's content, apologized, and I brought the tree inside. Dad was impressed with me, and Diablo dragged himself out of bed to help me set up the tree. I realized in the meantime that he had hoped to spend one final Christmas with me, to give me some heartwarming memories to hold on to when he would be gone. But at that moment, I didn't consider it. I simply had fun, carrying out our usual Christmas routine. We didn't have much to hang on the branches, no fancy lights and candles and whatnot. Just these same old tinsel and baubles that we had reused ever since I could remember. But the tree still turned out stunning, and it was made even better for me by the fact that I went out and got it myself. I behaved after that, waiting for the days to pass one by one. Dad got visibly worse with each one, to the point where he needed to be spoon-fed and couldn't get up to use the bathroom. But I still held out hope, convinced that once Christmas came, Santa would give me my present. It felt like years waiting for the 24th to arrive, but it swung around eventually. I stayed up waiting, knowing full well that I wasn't supposed to do that. After all, Santa skipped houses if the kids inside didn't sleep. But I wanted to meet him and ask him my wish face to face, to make sure that it would come true. Evening came and passed and night settled outside, and I pretended to go to sleep after we ate dinner and Daisy had left. As soon as I was sure that Dad was asleep, I got up and made my way to the living room on my toes. With no place to really hide in the small room, I got behind the Christmas tree and waited. My hope was that the darkness would hide me for long enough until Santa came in. The only clock in the house was on the opposite wall, in full view but barely visible. I watched these seconds ticking away into minutes, seeing 10 p.m. turn to 11. It was quite the ordeal to stand and wait for that long, but I was determined. I nearly fell asleep at one point, but 11:59 rolled around, and that sobered me up really good. I held my breath as I watched the sweep hand going, until it reached the last second before midnight. And then it got stuck, refusing to transition into midnight. Did the battery run out? I wondered. At any rate, I thought no big deal of it. Just because the clock had stopped didn't mean that midnight wouldn't come. I waited for a few seconds for Santa to come down the admittedly small chimney. But as these seconds turned into a minute, I started to worry. Did he figure me out? Did I undo all of my goodness with this one stunt? Did he skip our house? I got out from behind the tree, walking out into the open as my worry turned to panic. I had blown it. "No," I whispered with desperation. No, please. I'm sorry, please." The words got stuck in my throat when I heard something from outside. The sound of skittering feet approaching the house from the surrounding woods, tapping on the walls as something climbed to the roof. Santa came after all, and I waited for him with bated breath. The sounds of his rushing feet reached the roof, and then they stopped. I looked at the chimney intently, backing away slowly to give him room. Suddenly, something scraped against the bricks and mortar, giving off a bristly sound, and before long, I saw a face emerge from the fireplace. 2 beady black eyes came into view first, scanning the room from side to side and settling on me, and the rest of his head followed, looking like silly putty being forced through a tube. My wonder turned to terror as he advanced little by little, revealing a thin, centipede-like body with many small legs. After it was done and he was fully in the room with me, he stared at me for what felt like hours. His mouth contorted into a twisted grin, the corners of his lips cracking and spreading until they reached his ears. Hundreds of tiny needle-sharp teeth peered at me from inside his maw, yellowed and blasted with decay. "What are you doing up so late, child?" it questioned, bringing me out of my stupefaction. "You should be sleeping." I'm waiting for Santa." I shuddered in answer. Are you him?" "You shouldn't be waiting for Santa," he answered. "That makes you a naughty boy." "I'm sorry," I mumbled, on the verge of tearing up. "But I wanted—" "Let me guess," he said in a bored tone. "You wanted to ask for a specific gift. What would it be? A new bicycle? Toys?" "Make Daddy feel better. He's sick," I said with conviction. "That's the only present I want." He raised an eyebrow hearing that and scurried closer to me. His long body coiled, surrounding me as his beady eyes examined me. The color in my face drained, and it took all that I had to keep from screaming and running away. "Very well," he answered. "Let us see your father. I might be able to offer you what you wish for." He pulled away, allowing me to lead him to Dad's bedroom. I did so, opening the door slowly to reveal the dark room. Dad was in his bed sleeping, so Santa followed me inside. He pushed himself up, holding his spindly body above Dad with only a couple of hind legs. "He does look sick," he admitted. One of his front limbs reached down, touching Dad's forehead. "Very sick, but I can help." "Then do it, please," I whispered. "I will, but only if you play a game with me," he answered. "If you beat me at it, I will cure your father." And if I lose?" I asked, scared by the prospect. "That's a surprise you'll have to find out," he answered and gave me another grin that sent chills down my spine. I wanted to refuse, but seeing Dad in that state broke my heart. He had done so much for me over the years that I couldn't let him down now when he needed me. "What's the game?" I asked. "You've been a good little boy all year, so I'll let you choose," he said. I thought it over for a bit, trying to decide what game I was best at. I didn't know a lot of them, so my options were limited, but I eventually settled on one. "Hide and seek," I answered. His grin grew a bit wider hearing that. "Okay," he said with satisfaction. "I'll do the seeking and you'll do the hiding. If I can't find you for 10 minutes, you win. Is that good?" "Yes," I answered, already thinking of potential hiding spots. "Great. I'll count to 100, so scurry off and hide." He turned to face the wall and started counting out loud, so I bolted out of the room and left the house entirely. As tempting as it was to hide inside, I figured it would be the first place that he would look for me. My best chance was to get as far away as I could before he started looking. The moment that I got outside, I was taken aback by what I found. It was snowing pretty heavily only minutes prior, but now the bulky flakes were suspended in midair. There was no wind, no sound, no movement whatsoever, like the world itself paused for our game. It looked and felt surreal. Hearing the creature counting loudly inside, I blocked all of it out and continued running. I counted down from 100 in my head as I went, and I got pretty far away from home in that time. I hoped to make it to the treehouse, but it was too far away, so I dove into some bushes instead. Without anything on me to tell time, I do approximate as I waited for the 10 minutes to pass. I think it was 2 minutes, and by the time that he left the house as well, I could see his monstrous figure leaving through the front door in the pale moonlight. But something was different. He moved faster, more erratically, his head turning from side to side in search of me. I thought that he didn't know about the treehouse, but I was wrong. He scurried past the bushes I was hiding in, going right for it. I caught a glimpse of his face when he passed by, and his expression petrified me. He looked scary before, but now he looked downright terrifying. The grin on his lips more evil than I thought possible. He really wanted to catch me. I saw him reaching the treehouse and climbing up with little effort. He pushed his body inside through the window, breaking some of the planks apart in the process. When he didn't find me out there, he let out an angry screech and started tearing the treehouse to shreds, until all that was left was a devastated husk. When he was done, he climbed down and looked at the forest for a few tense moments. I started realizing just how dire my situation was, so I retreated further into the darkness. But before I did, I saw his face contorting as something bubbled to the surface of his skin between his eyes. A deformed snout formed out of his flesh, and he started sniffing the air with it. I didn't wait to see if he would find me, knowing full well that he would. Instead, I got out of the bushes on the other side and ran away deeper into the forest. I estimated that maybe 5 minutes had passed, so I had 5 more to go. The sounds of his feet rushing after me came from behind, so I forced myself to run even faster. With hiding out of the question, I had to find a way to escape him for long enough. The way Charles tracked down prey using his sense of smell came to mind, so I knew that I needed to erase my scent somehow. The river, I decided, remembering how that deer managed to escape Charles and his nose. I ran into its general direction, deeper and deeper into the woods, and I eventually came across it. Luckily for me, it wasn't entirely frozen over. I stepped out on the treacherous ice until I felt it cracking beneath my feet, so I shot a soul at it and broke it. I fell into the freezing water, feeling it pushing all the air out of my lungs as it seeped into my clothes and invaded my skin. It was frigid, and thermal shock or hypothermia were very real dangers, but they didn't worry me much at that moment. In fact, they barely crossed my mind. My only goal was to escape the horrific creature that was after me. The current pushed me under the ice and carried me along on its underside, scraping me against the jagged edges that had formed. I got scratched and bruised, and the sensation left the tips of my fingers and my feet as the cold worked its way into my flesh, and my lungs burned for air. The ordeal didn't last for long, but it was excruciating. Half a minute later at most, the current spat me out on another break in the ice. I clung to it, trying in vain to drag myself out as I panted heavily. Prying my eyes open, I could barely make out the spot upstream where I had jumped in. The creature reached it and paused, sniffing the air as puffs of steam left its nostrils. He looked around in confusion, so I ducked back down into the waters. And despite the heavy price that I paid, my plan had worked. Coming back up to the surface, I saw him crossing the river and continuing deeper into the woods. As the few minutes left of our game passed, I just waited, holding on for dear life. Worry finally overtook me as the dire nature of my situation set in. I would win, but I would freeze to death in the process, as I didn't have the strength to pull myself out of the river. And even if I did get out, I wouldn't make it on my way home to exposure. Wet to the bone as I was, and with the temperature outside well into the negatives, the air itself would do me in. I was starting to slip away into unconsciousness when I noticed these snowflakes begin to fall to the ground again. That was a clear signal that the game was over, so I started yelling, "Help, please help me." My voice, although weak, carried far and wide through the night. I kept calling out, and soon enough I heard the creature barreling towards me through the forest. He emerged from between the trees with a wide frown on his face that turned to a grin when he saw me. "You're quite resourceful, Nicholas," he said as he approached the river. "I must commend you for that and for defeating me." He stepped onto the ice, and I expected his huge body to break it easily. but it didn't. The ice didn't as much crack under his enormous weight. One of his appendages came up and he pointed it my way for me to grab it. I did, and he effortlessly lifted me out of the water. "Now hold on tight, we have to get you to shelter right away," he said as he put me on his back. I got my arms around his throat and he galloped through the forest with the same amazing speed he had displayed before. If not for these circumstances I was in, I might have enjoyed the bumpy, fast-paced ride. In no time at all, we were back home, and I went inside to change and warm up. "You'll get a nasty cold tomorrow, but you'll live," he told me, "and your father will as well. You won, so I will see to my end of our agreement." He went to Dad's room with me in tow, and he placed his creepy feet along Dad's sleeping form. And color gradually returned to Dad's skin and he drew in a deep inhale, but he didn't wake up. "There, I have upheld my promise," he said and turned to leave the room. "See you next year, Nicholas, and remember to be a good boy." He then left through the chimney, and I heard him scurrying off back into the forest. True to his word, my father woke up the next morning in perfect health, to everyone's utter shock except my own. "I asked Santa to make you better as my gift," I explained to him and Daisy. I tried to tell them more, to go into detail, but I couldn't. And I don't mean that in a corny, "oh, I didn't want them to worry" way. I literally couldn't. The words wouldn't travel up my throat, no matter how hard I tried to push them out. My father nodded and a few tears escaped his eyes. Tears of happiness, I thought at the time. But now I'm having doubts. That Christmas was the happiest one in my life, and getting to spend it with my father made me forget my ordeal. Later checkups with the doctors revealed that any trace of cancer was gone from his body, like it had never even been there. They questioned him, of course, but that's got them nowhere. So they called it a miraculous recovery and they left it at that. But my story doesn't end there, unfortunately. For the creature kept its other promises as well, returning year after year on Christmas Eve for us to play again. Just as the first time, it allowed me to choose, and I chose every game under the sun over the years. I would research and practice them the whole year beforehand, and I never picked games based on luck, just ones based on skill. That allowed me to remain one step ahead and win each and every time, much to the creature's surprise. My father lived a long and healthy life, but he passed in the summer of 2020 at 72. I myself am 43, going on 44, and we maintained a close relationship throughout the years. His passing was devastating to me, but I found solace in the fact that I delayed it all of those decades ago. But then something else happened, and on the Christmas Eve of 2020, I finally lost my first game with the creature. He grinned wildly like he had done back when he chased me, and I prepared myself to be dragged off to some horrible fate. Instead, he left without saying a word. I don't know if he'll return again this Christmas, but truth be told, I might not live to see the 24th. A couple of months ago, I fell ill just like my dad had. I made appointments and got checked out, and my worst fear was realized. I was diagnosed with the same cancer that the creature got rid of in my father. Ever since, I've spent my time in and out of chemotherapy as I slowly deteriorated. Even though money is no longer a problem and medical knowledge has advanced so far, I'm still beyond saving. I'm lying on my deathbed now as I write this out, counting the moments, unsure of how many I have left. But I'm not scared for myself now. You see, I have a loving wife by my side and 2 young kids of my own, 2 brothers of 7 and 9 years old respectively. 2 amazing yet naive kids that I love like nothing else in this world, and 2 are as pained to see me in this condition as I was to see my father. So yes, the creature might return this Christmas to play once more, but I worry that this time I won't be one of the players. I've tried talking to my wife and sons about it, but it's just like all those years ago. The words about the creature won't come out of me. My only hope now is that I'll be 6 feet under come the 24th of December, so that my sins won't be passed down to my sons like they've been passed down to me by my father. I would gladly take passing over waking up healthy on Christmas morning.